Hello and welcome to this tutorial on Adobe Photoshop's Variables tool. So the Variables tool in Photoshop is a great way to easily import a large quantity of data, so either text or images, to replace elements from an image and then export every variation into its own PSD file. So it's what's also known as data-driven design. I've created a simple but efficient example to explain how to do this. So here we have a card for an open house, and let's say we have 5 different variations to do, where each would have their own broker picture here, a house picture that goes here, a different date, address, and a different broker name for each. So I've already set up the final result to show you what it will look like. As you could see, every variation has 2 different pictures, different date, address, and the broker name. And also to show you that you get to keep the different settings and effects that you apply to each layer before importing the elements, I put a red color overlay on the broker picture, a drop shadow on the house picture, the date is written in Lithos, the address is written in brush script, and the broker name is written in Arial bold. I've included all the files that I've used throughout this tutorial in a zip file linked underneath this video. You could also follow along with a written version on my website. And you could obviously also just use your own files to get to the same result. We'll do it step by step. So first we'll start with the easiest one, which is a single text variable. Then we'll do multiple text variables. Then we'll move on to a single image, then multiple images, and then finally how to do it all in one single shot. Now, how does it work? The process involves 2 elements, 2 main steps. The first one is preparing the external data. So what will be imported in Photoshop to replace the variables? And second, defining the variables in Photoshop. So what will be replaced by the elements that we import, and exactly how will they be imported? So if you want to import text or pictures in Photoshop, you need to create a .txt or .csv file, which is basically a spreadsheet in text format. Now, the best way to create those is often with an Excel or numbers spreadsheet, but unfortunately, they'll almost never work when you try to import them. They'll always include hidden characters, there's always something wrong with them. For many reasons, it just seems that they're not compatible. I've tried for a long time to make a perfect CSV from Excel or numbers so that I could go straight from the spreadsheet to Photoshop. It just doesn't work, but we could clean it up very quickly with a simple text editor. So usually when I receive data to import into an image, it looks something like this. So this is a spreadsheet and numbers on Mac. Excel, whether on Mac or PC, works just as well. So as you could see, the top row matches what we had in our example before. So the address, the date, the broker picture, and the house picture. Now let's start with the simplest form of variable in this case, which is a single text variable to import. So let's say I just wanted the address for now. Now since this is number, there's a title on top. I'll leave it on purpose for now. I'll show you after how to remove it. So what I do is I select the first column, I copy it, I'll paste it into a new document, always starting in the first cell of the first row, first column, so always A1, and then I just paste it in. Then I export that as a CSV. So I'll call it single text variable. And that's it. Now, as far as you know, you have a CSV that you could import in Photoshop. But like I told you, Photoshop is very picky, so I could tell you right now, it probably won't work. So we'll close this. We could delete this file because we don't need it for now. Then we'll take our CSV, drop it into a simple text editor. So I'm using BB Edit. I'll put the link underneath this video. It's free. There is a paid version, but for what we're doing here now, the free version will work perfectly. So if we look at our CSV file, first of all, we have the title from before that I told you we were going to remove. And as you could see, there's a bunch of extra characters. So luckily, the extra characters pretty much always have the exact same number on every line. Sometimes you'll get a certain quantity on the lines with no text and a different quantity on all the lines with text. So it's still just two manipulations at this point to remove them, which isn't so bad. So first, I'll start by removing my table 1 title, which we don't need. You always have to have the variable on the top line. So this time address, that works fine. Now for the extra characters, I'll select one line, copy it, then I'll do find and replace, which is usually Command F no matter what software you're using. I'll paste in my line of extra characters. I leave the replace field blank, and then I just do replace all. So as you could see, all the different extra characters have been removed. The line breaks are still here, so obviously if I press delete, I could remove them. However, Photoshop doesn't see the line breaks as an extra character, so whether they're there or not, it will still import perfectly in Photoshop. So now all I have to do is save that. I could save it on top of itself. And that's it. Now this CSV is ready to be imported in Photoshop, and we know that it will work. Now what if we have multiple text variables to import in one batch? So we're back in our original spreadsheet from before. So let's say I wanted to import the address, the date, and the broker name, which were our three text variables into the original example. So what I do is I select all three columns. Again, I copy it, paste it into a new document, always starting at cell A1, and I just paste it in. Then I export that as a CSV. So I'll call it 3 text variables. The name really doesn't matter. You could just call it what you want. And now if I open that into my simple text editor, plain text editor, again, you see we have the extra characters. We have the extra title, which I didn't remove before. And as I mentioned before, this time the lines with no text have a certain number of extra characters. The lines with text seem to have another number of extra characters. So first we'll remove the title. So we have our variables on top. Then we'll select one line of extra characters. Copy that. Do search and replace again. Just to be sure, I'll repaste my entire line of extra characters. Leave the replace field empty. Do replace all. So it removed all of those. Then I'll select one line with the other number of extra characters. Copy it. Paste it into the find field. Leave replace all blank. And do replace all. Now as you could see, I have the three variables on top separated by a comma, and my different text elements to import also all separated by a comma. Now the commas that are separating our different elements are what's known as delimiters. You could have CSV files with many different punctuation marks serving as delimiters, but Photoshop needs commas. So let's say you've used Excel to create your CSV. Unless you have some kind of special plugin, chances are the delimiters by default are semicolons. So if that's the case, you need to do the same thing. So find and replace so that you could replace all the semicolons with commas and make it compatible for Photoshop. Now let's say you actually wanted to get punctuation within your text string. Then what you do is that you simply put it between quotation marks, like this. And then at this point, I could have different punctuation. Let's say I do this, I add the semicolon here. It will import exactly as it's written between the two quotation marks, although we won't do it this time. And finally, the order of the variables. Obviously, it usually doesn't matter. As you could see now, as long as they're called properly, the address will go with the address, the date, and the broker, it goes by different column. However, one thing that's important to know now is that later on in Photoshop, you'll have the option to name your data sets according to the first column. And then later on after that, you get to name your files according to your data sets. So let's say in this case, I wanted my end files to be called with the name of the broker. I would go back to my spreadsheet, make sure that the broker names are in the first column, do my CSV with that, and then at the end, I'll be able to have files that are named after the brokers. Otherwise, it really doesn't matter what the order is. Now, before creating a list of pictures to import, there's two things that I do. The first one, I make sure that all the pictures for every variable are in a separate folder. So the name really doesn't matter, but as you could see here, I have one folder with all the broker pictures and another folder with all the house pictures. To me, that's the simplest way to do it. And the second thing that I do is that I check the size that I need the pictures to be, and I resize them now at the proper size, proper resolution, so that when I import them later on, I'll know exactly how it's going to look like when it's done. So to check the proper size in Photoshop, now in this example, I already know that all my files are at a standard 72 dpi. Let's say I did want to see and make sure it was that resolution. I would just go to image, image size, and then you have it here, the proper resolution. Now if I want to get the exact size, let's say for the broker pictures, I just do command, click on the broker pick layer to make a selection around it. Then I'll open my info window, and I know that at 72 dpi, my broker pictures are exactly 267 pixel wide by 319 pixels high. So as you could see, I already resized all of my pictures so that they're exactly that size. Now this way there won't be any cropping, resizing, or stretching when I import my pictures, which is pretty useful when you have hundreds of files for a client and you don't feel like going through each and every one of them and verify them one by one. It just reduces the risk of mistake in the end. Now to create the CSV for pictures, it works the exact same way, except instead of having different text strings, we'll have the path to each and every file. So of course it is possible to create the list of file paths by doing a whole lot of copy paste. There's obviously faster ways to do it. So on Mac, here's how I do it. I've created this little automator application, which I've included in the links under the video. So you just double click on it. In the window that opens up, you select the folder that you want the file path for all the files. You just do choose, and there you go. It opens up TextEdit, and here I have the list of all the files. So what I do is I copy it into my plain text editor. I add my variable on top. So in this case, it was broker pick. I just save that, whether as a text file or a CSV, it really doesn't matter. So I'll call that one single picture. And that's it. I can now import that in Photoshop. Now if I had multiple pictures to import in the same CSV or the same text file, so I copy this, I go back to my spreadsheet, create a new one. I'll just paste this. Again, I start at A1. So here I have all my broker pics. And then I just repeat the process for the house pictures. So again, the application, select my folder with the house pictures this time. I got my text edit open up, I copy it, back to my plain text editor. Again, I add the variable on top. That one was called house. And then I go back to my spreadsheet and put it there. This time I start in B1. So automatically it makes my 2 columns. I find that spreadsheets are always the easiest way to create different columns. The only thing is, again, it's going to add all those extra characters that we had before. So I'll export that to a CSV that I'll call, let's say, 2 pictures. Open it again in the plain text editor. And as you could see, I still have all those extra characters. So again, I select one line, copy it, find and replace, paste it here, replace field is blank, and I do replace all. As you could see, there was again a different amount of extra characters and the lines with text. So copy it, find and replace, again I paste it here, and I just do replace all. Now before saving it for a final time, I just have a last look. So I got my 2 variables on top, separated by a comma. I got my 2 elements to import, also separated by a comma. Everything looks good, the file extensions are here, so I could just save that, and then it's ready for Photoshop. So now that you know how to create a CSV with multiple image variables and one with multiple text variables, it's pretty easy to figure out how to do one that will have both. All you need to do is copy paste the information into the same spreadsheet, every variable in its own column. So here I have the one with the file paths from before, so I'll just go back to my original spreadsheet. I'll copy the text. And I'll just paste it in this spreadsheet here, always making sure that my first line will be my variables. So I have the variables on top. It's numbers, it really doesn't matter what it put as a header line, so just disregard it for now. And I have my 3 text variables here. Now, let's say I wanted at the end my files to be named after the brokers. So it means this information has to be in the first column. So I'll add a column here. I'll cut that. And I'll paste it back into the first column. So now I'll have the option to name my data sets with the information here. And afterwards, I'll have the option to name my pictures after my data set. So I'll just export that again into a CSV. I'll call it all variables. I still need, because it comes from a spreadsheet, to put it through my plain text editor to clean it up, as you could see. So I take one line, copy, find and replace, and replace all. Now the lines with text seem to have 3 commas this time. So I'll find and replace again, paste that in, replace field is blank, and replace all. That's it. Now I just save this, and I'm ready to import in Photoshop. Now in our example, the file is already prepared. So we have everything on its own layer. The different pictures to be received already have a box at the proper size to receive the picture. The pictures have been resized. Ideally, there's the same size. If not, they could also just be the same ratio, where they will shrink without being resized or stretched in one way or another. That's really up to you. One thing that's important to know is that it only works with standard layers. It doesn't work with smart objects. If you want to do something similar to variables with smart objects, it has to be scripted, and that's a whole other tutorial. Now for the text, same thing. Every text element has its own layer. It doesn't have to be called exactly the same than your variable. As you could see here, the address is just called address goes here, which was actually easier than calling it address. Otherwise, I would have two layers called the exact same thing, or pretty much. So let's say, just to show you, I create a new file. Sometimes when you receive your template, you'll still have to modify it just to make it ready to receive the variable. So if you ever have to do that, a text layer is just a standard layer. I use the type tool. So let's say I call it text goes here. And that's it. A separate layer with a text ready to be replaced. Now before importing it, I would choose the different styles. So if I want it bold, if I want a specific font, anything at all, I put it before importing it. Otherwise, I'll have to go back to every PSD, modify them one by one, which I would do with an action, but it would still be a waste of time at this point. Now, if I want to import images, I would just create a new layer, create a selection, the size I want it to be at the end, just fill it up with any color, and that's it. Now, layer 1 here would be ready to receive an image, and this one would be ready to receive a text variable. So I could close that, we don't need it. And now we're back to our original image where we're ready to import the CSV that we've just created. So go to Image, Variables. You'll notice that Apply Dataset and Datasets here are grayed out. That's because we haven't defined any variables and datasets yet. So go to Define, and you'll get this screen. Now this screen has three different options: the layer, visibility, and text replacement. So the layer is a list of all the different layers in your document. By default, it will start on the layer I was on before. So you see I was on address goes here, but obviously you could just change it from here. Visibility, now that option is almost never used, and it requires a deeper understanding of the variable tools. So I'll leave it as a bonus section at the end of this video. But basically, it's used to select which layer will be visible in which data set. So you need to set a visibility variable, and then if you create more than one, you could actually have different settings for different data sets. It's a bit more complicated. It's one of those options that you never use, but that when you do need it, I guess you're happy to have it. For now, leave it unchecked. One thing that's good to know and that's easier to use than this option is when you export the files, if you hide the layer, let's say I hide the visibility of address goes here, and I export my files, all the files will have this layer invisible. So there's really no need to set specific layers for specific data sets. But anyways, if you need to, the option is there. And then finally, text replacement. If I'm on an image layer, this will change, as you could see here. Basically here you just type the name of your variable exactly like you had it in your CSV. So let's enter our information. If we start with the text, so address goes here, I have text replacement. Now if I go back to my CSV, you'll remember that it was called address. So I just type it in exactly the same way that I had it in my CSV. And as you can see, there's a star because this layer will now be modified by a variable. Then I had my broker name. Again, I had the check mark. That one was called broker. Then I had the date, so date goes here. That variable was called date. The broker pick, which was also called broker pick. And finally, the house picture, which goes here, which was called house. Now, as you notice, there's different options when it's an image. So instead of text replacement, it's pixel replacement. And then you have method and alignment. Now, what this means is how will your image fit into the box that we've added before. So it's pretty straightforward. The different options are explained at the bottom. So fit, it will resize it to fit within the bounding box and preserve the proportions. You have fill, as is, and conform. Anyways, there's no need for me to go through them all. If you did follow my instructions from before, you've resized your images properly. So you could leave them as is, which means they won't change, they won't be stretched, and you know that they'll fill in your box properly. If ever you had the proper ratio but not the proper size, then you could just do fit, and this will also not destroy your images. But if you've resized them the proper size before, basically whatever option you choose here won't change anything. It will just fill the box exactly the way you wanted it to. Now, that's it for our variables. Now our data sets. To get to the next screen, you could either choose data sets here or do previous or next. There's only two screens. There's three ways for some reason to go between the two. Now the first option once you're in data sets is to do import. Select file. So we'll select the all variables CSV that we've just created. Leave the encoding at automatic. Use the first column for data set names. Now remember before I told you had the option to name your data sets with the first column, and then later on you'll have the option to name your files with your data set names. So I usually check this one. Otherwise, your data sets will be called data set 1, data set 2, data set 3, and so on, which means your files will also be called that. So you kind of not know what they are in the end. And then replace existing data sets. At the moment, we don't have any, so that option really doesn't change anything. If you uncheck it, what it will do is that it will append the new data set. So it will add them to the data sets that you've added before. For example, in this case, we could have done one for each text variable, one for each image variable, and then import 5 CSVs, uncheck that, and the result would have been the same. It just would have taken more time. So we click OK, and now that's it. Here we could see the previews if we switch from one data set to the other. As you could see, they're called with the broker name, which is what I had put in my first column before. See, it matches this variable here. And here I could see exactly what the different variables are for each data set. Yeah, for an image, it asked me to select the picture if I wanted to just change this one. If I do apply, it will apply just the one I have displayed here, but that's not really important, so I'll just do OK. It goes back to my original image, but the data sets are loaded. As you could see, if I do apply data sets and preview, I could choose the one I want and either apply it or cancel. And the option you'll usually use is in File, Export, Datasets as Files. Now what this will do, if I leave it on all data sets, is that it will create a PSD file for every different variation that I've just set in my CSV. Now for the file naming, you have to use either a data set or to add a number afterwards. Otherwise, they'll all be called the same. So every document will just ask you if you want to overwrite. Usually, I pretty much leave everything blank except the first one is on dataset name. This I'll just put it to none. And then all my files will be called according to the broker name. The file extension, either lowercase or uppercase, that really doesn't matter. The reason why you can only export it to PSDs is because you do need the layers, right? Because every layer will be a different variable. If you want to create, let's say, JPEGs at the end, you'll have to create an action that will take all your PSDs and export them as JPEGs. But again, actions are for another tutorial. For now, we're just doing the variables. And then that would be it. I would click OK once I select my folder. Now, hopefully you've been able to save some time by importing text and images with the variables tool. However, it might be that your files are not named exactly the way you want them to at the end. So there's a couple of tricks for that. The first one would be to add in the first column in your CSV when you import it a text variable, which is actually the name that you want to give the files in the end. Now, whether or not you want that to appear in the image, doesn't matter. Let's say here for the address, I would have used that as my first layer. This is how I want to name my files, but I don't want it to appear in the image. All I need to do is hide that layer. And now when I name my data sets after the first column and then afterwards my files after my data set, I'll be able to have them named from the information in the first column without that information being in my image. So that's one useful trick. Another one, let's say you only have images and for some reason you don't do this trick of having the first column hidden to name your files, you're going to end up with a bunch of files that look like this. So this is my actual file name, which is my file path, .jpeg, which is the image I imported, .psd, which is the image I exported. So if I end up with this, what I do is I use a software called Name Changer. I'll put the link under the video. It's a completely free software and it's actually quite useful. So I'll select all my files. They're all named the same way anyways. And I'll begin with removing the path from the beginning of the name. So here I just do remove characters in range. So the first characters, I start at 0, the first one, and I remove, let's see how many characters that's going to be. I could have typed it in. I remove the first 49 characters. Every change you do, you have to click rename with this software. So I do rename. As you could see, they've changed here as well. Now they're called .jpeg.psd, which is quite close, not quite what I want. Now if I want to change the end, if I just do from end, I'll start removing the PSD extension. So then I go to Option, Hide Extensions, and now I could just change the actual name. So I'll remove the last 4 characters, so I'm just left with the actual name. I click Rename. Now as you could see here, they're called perfectly house1, house2, 3.psd with nothing else. I could put back the extension. You could see my name is okay here. There's a bunch of options with that software. Basically, every change you could think of in the name, there's a way to do it with that. So these are the 2 tricks on how to rename your files. And finally, the only option left, the visibility option that I said I would keep for the end. Now, this is a lot more complicated than it looks. Once you understand it, it's actually quite simple, but like I said, it's really not an option that you're going to use often. However, the one time you're going to need to use it, I'm sure you'll be pretty happy to understand how that works. So what visibility allows you to do is to select certain layers that will be hidden in certain data set. So let's say I declare one visibility variable, which is really just a regular text variable. I'll be able to put that visibility variable on certain layers and have those layers hidden. And the thing is, if I only declare one, so let's say here I call it vis1. Now you still need to put a value to it in order for it to be a proper CSV and to be able to import it. So let's say I just put var everywhere, it really doesn't matter because I'm not going to use it as a text variable. Now I have one visibility layer. Whatever I call it, I decide I'll use that one as a visibility layer. So every layer I apply that to on the data sets that I choose will be invisible. The thing is, because I only have one variable now, let's say I apply it on layer 1 and on layer 3. Well, every time layer 1 is invisible, layer 3 will be invisible as well. And the same the other way around. Every time one of them is visible, the other one will be visible as well. You can't split them up. If you want to be able to do that, then you need to declare more than one visibility variable. So let's say I declare another one, so I'll call it vis2. I still put my value in every data set. Now if I save that, I go back to our Photoshop example. We're going to go back to change our variables. So let's say I use vis1 for the address and the date, and vis2 for the two pictures. So the address visibility, I'll put vis1. And for the date, I use vis1 again. Now it's going to tell me, as soon as I change something, it's going to tell me that my variable is already in use, which is fine. It means that it will link both variables, as you could see here. Technically, you could do the same with text replacement or image replacement if you want to have one text variable imported in two different places in your document. And now for the pictures, I'll use vis2. Again with the linked file. Now I'll import my document again. As you could see, I now have a visibility variable on top of my 3 text and my 2 pictures. Now vis1 controls the date and the address, so if I put them invisible, I just put everything invisible. vis2, I'll leave it visible for now. So now for every data set, I could choose if I want to have the address or not. So data set 1, it was invisible. Data set 2 is now visible. You could do that for every data set individually. Now, same thing for the images. If I go here, vis2 was the one with the images. So if I put that invisible, it removes my images. It leaves the rest as is. Same thing here, invisible as well. So they're both invisible. Everything except the broker name is invisible. I go back to my second set. As you can see, the address and the date, so vis1 are visible. The pictures are invisible. So that's why I created 2. Now every time I hide the date, it means I have to hide the address. Same thing for the pictures. So that's how the visibility variables work. Like I said, it's a pretty complex option. It's not something you use often, especially knowing that you could just hide a layer, export your files, and it will do it on every single PSD that you export. But if it's there, you'll be happy you have it. So there you go. That covers everything about the variables options in Photoshop. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that it saves you a lot of time. Thanks for watching.